Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, your podcast helping your family cruise a little smarter, except for when we're not talking about cruising, which is going to be today. But before we jump into what our topic is going to be, I'd like to welcome back to the show today our co-host all the way down in California. How you doing today, Chris?
Pretty good. Can't complain. Things have been nice weather-wise here, and you know how much I like a mild, dry heat.
Well, not only has the weather been nice, but you're sitting down there watching Space Mountain go round and round and round as we record this episode, aren't you?
Yes, the Magic Keys just went on sale today. So for those of you who don't know, Magic Key is the replacement program for annual passes in California. And basically, the Magic Key program is an annual pass, but you have to make reservations instead of just showing up on a day that isn't blocked out. But anyways, it's on sale today, and Disney is doing that thing where they meter how many people can get into the website and buy it at a time. So I am watching Space Mountain just spin around and around while it says that I have more than an hour wait. And it said that for the past hour. So I'm sure I have like a 12 or 13 hour wait, realistically.
Well, so if you drop out sometime during the recording of this show, we'll know where Chris went. He'll be busy buying his magic key to the kingdom. So, well, let's jump into today's episode. We're bringing back a guest who they do not just go out for the weekend, I don't think, on a vacation. They don't do those 3-day dream cruises. The first time we've talked about Alaska. We've talked about cruising across on the transatlantic. And I knew when she reached out to do another show with us, it was going to be something iconic. So before we talk about what that is, welcome back to the show. Lauren, how are you doing today?
Great. Super excited to be talking with you guys. It's always fun.
Yeah, it is always fun. I feel like, not that Disney's itineraries are boring. Obviously, the ships go to really cool places, but it's also cool that you sort of chart your own path, so to speak, and find really cool things to do in remote parts of the world.
I have Disney to thank for it usually, but we definitely try to do some exciting things when we can.
Okay, so this trip was in replacement to a cruise, wasn't it, Lauren?
It was. So we were booked originally in 2020 on the Iceland, Norway, Scotland cruise, which was postponed till 2021. And then our 2021 cruise was again canceled. When we looked to bump it forward to all the way out to 2022, the scheduling of it just didn't work for us. And the itinerary wasn't ideal for what we wanted to do. And so we decided to see if we could do Iceland as a land-based adventure. And that's what we ended up doing.
Chris, is this a place that you've wanted to go?
Yeah, but truthfully, only for the Northern Lights. Maybe today will teach me that there is so much more to do than I thought there was, but I've never thought about Reykjavik except, that's a really good place to see the Northern Lights. So I'm excited to hear what all you can do up there, because obviously you didn't just watch the Northern Lights for however many nights you were there. I'm sure there was plenty of stuff to do. Also, that might even not be something that's happening this time of year. I don't actually know when the Northern Lights happen. So it may not even have been a part of your trip goal at all.
No, while we were there, it was basically 24 hours or close to 24 hours of sun. So no Northern Lights for us.
No Northern Lights. So you had to do the other things that Reykjavik and that area are known for. So I'm excited to hear what those other things are.
Before we jump into it, Lauren, as a kind of shout out, yes, this is an itinerary. Well, not everything that you did, but you can visit Iceland with Disney Cruise Line. They generally have a cruise in the summer on the Disney Magic out of Europe that goes up there. And also Adventures by Disney offers trips to Iceland, which I think started 2 years ago. And they sold out right away initially. And so a lot of people I know are excited to go up there and visit this island, this beautiful country. And so you guys did a lot of things. Let's just jump right on into it. How did you plan this, and what were your overall thoughts and goals?
Honestly, we had heard about the podcast talking about Iceland and Norway, and that's what got us interested. I didn't have any burning desire to go to Iceland, honestly. When we thought we were going with DCL, we looked into what to do with the ports that they go to, which is Reykjavik and Akureyri. kind of planned out what we thought we wanted to do in those two ports. When we shifted, it was about 4 months from the time we shifted to the time we went to Iceland. And so in those 4 months, I grabbed a ton of guidebooks, looked at what was available. I used some of the stuff that Disney Cruise Line does to see what's available in those areas. And then I found a great resource that I've never used before for planning, and it was probably my favorite, is the Visiting Iceland subreddit. It was probably one of the most helpful places I went to find like some of the really nitty gritty details and ins and outs that helped plan the trip.
I mean, Reddit, I've not heard of Reddit as being a like go-to source for travel advice, but it makes sense that it would be, especially if you're going to a more remote place where it's probably not the easiest to find a ton of trip information on the internet about, it's one thing if you're like, trip advice for Honolulu. But if you're looking up like trip advice for Iceland, I can imagine it's nice to have it all sort of aggregated in one area, like a subreddit.
Yeah, it was really helpful and really current. The subreddit did a really good job. I usually knew changes to things that were going on within Iceland earlier than they would even be announced on official sites most of the time. And so it was really helpful in the kind of the really detailed planning to be able to look there, ask questions, and find out answers quicker than I would having to kind of go through older information or outdated blogs or podcasts or anything else that was talking about visiting Iceland.
Well, as we kind of jump into it, Iceland can be broken down into several different regions for people to visit, depending upon how much time you have there. And most flights fly into the capital city, Reykjavik. Why don't we just start off with how you got there?
Sure. So went on this trip was myself and my husband, Jason. We did 2 flights to get to Reykjavik. First, we flew from our home airport up to Seattle. There's not a whole lot of flights that go direct to Reykjavik from the West Coast. There's a couple of airports you can pick from, and we decided to use Seattle. And so we took a flight direct from Seattle to Iceland in Reykjavik. It's about a 7.5, 8-hour flight. And so we landed in Reykjavik at 6 a.m, which is pretty typical for flights from the US. The way they set it up is most flights from the US fly overnight and land early in the morning. And when you're leaving Iceland, they leave Iceland time in the evening and get back sometime in the evening in the US.
I love Icelandair. We've used them several times. As a matter of fact, we just booked another trip with Icelandair for next summer to get over to Europe. If you can skip the East Coast in my book, I'm super happy. It is a little bit of chaos when you get there because all of their flights kind of arrive at once and people are kind of scrambling to get off the one plane and then go to, if they're not staying in Iceland, going on to their next planes. But in that chaos, it seems like it's always worked when we've gone through there. So good on you for that. Are you as a couple able to sleep on planes so that you're ready to go once you land? We could never do that.
50-50. Jason does a little bit better sleeping than I do. We use some tricks to kind of help with that. We napped. We knew it was going to be a long day once we landed to keep going, but our style is pretty much go, go, go. So once we landed at 6:15, our day started. And that definitely helps with kind of keeping yourself awake on the new time because, 6:15 Reykjavik time was like, 11 o'clock p.m. for West Coast time. So we just stayed up all night, pulled an all-nighter.
Pulled the all-nighter to see Iceland. Okay, so you guys booked a rental car and then you stayed at the Hilton in Reykjavik. Did you guys use points for anything? And how difficult was it to get a rental car over there?
Well, we were lucky. We had planned this trip before the mass plannings had kind of started. So we had our rental car booked. We picked the Hilton. It's a little bit outside of downtown. It has a couple of advantages. One, that it's quieter. Downtown Reykjavik in the evenings can be pretty loud. It also doesn't have generally free parking in downtown Reykjavik hotels. And so we were a half to a kilometer outside of downtown Reykjavik, and we could either drive in or there's tons of sidewalks, and most of the time we walked into downtown. And so the hotel worked really well for us, and it had the most important thing on Jason's checklist, which is a good gym.
Interesting. I guess in my mind, Reykjavik is like a one stoplight town with nothing to do. I'm very ill-informed because picturing Reykjavik being loud and raucous at night is not what I would have expected. Though the Hilton Reykjavik Nordica sounds like a fancy hotel to me. What are the vibes like at that hotel?
When we were there, it's a really nice hotel. We really enjoyed it. We had some downsides with a lot of tour companies use the hotel for their base, which we didn't know when we booked. And so there was, in the morning, sometimes there'd be a lot of kind of craziness in the lobby of tour companies coming in and out as they were checking in and out guests. And we were there for the duration of our trip. And so, we just sort of sidestepped it and avoided it in that sense. But otherwise, we really liked it. Overall, I would stay there again. The rooms were really spacious, which rooms in Iceland, from our overall experience, were more European style, obviously, than American. And so they're pretty small. And this one had a pretty spacious layout, which was nice since that was our home base for the full time we were in Iceland.
So I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit. What was your overall thoughts of Reykjavik as a town, exploring that? And then also food. Iceland's food options can be a little bit different. Obviously, I'm sure you can find something to eat there for everybody, but were you adventurous with the food at all?
I think the overall vibe of Reykjavik was pretty good. We didn't spend a whole lot of time in downtown, to be honest. We were kind of out exploring a lot. The food scene is really great. There's a lot of places to eat. There's a lot of really interesting food. There's a lot of international flavor, which I had heard, but was really surprising. You could get a lot of different ethnic type foods from restaurants kind of all over Reykjavik. One of the things that we weren't prepared for, though, and I felt like I didn't see anywhere and didn't really understand until we got to Reykjavik, is the restaurant hours. There is not a lot open before 11 a.m. Breakfast there's a couple of cafes, there's a couple of coffee shops, and that's it. And so everything opened between 11 and 11:30, which meant if you weren't eating during, those really strict kind of lunch hours from 11:30 on, it could be challenging to get food. And our style isn't to plan our days around meals. It's to shove the meals in wherever we can. But one of the things we do when we travel to kind of make up for that is we're big grocery store fans. We love a good grocery store or convenience store, and we pop in and get a ton of some of the grab and go food, some of the easy food to keep in the hotel. And we try whatever's local, whatever's good in Iceland. And so that's a lot of what we did was we grabbed snacks, shoved them in a bag and threw them in the hotel and kind of ate from that. And then sort of separated our trip into a couple really good meals at good restaurants to still make sure we tried some of the local food.
What were the most interesting local foods that you tried?
That's a good question. Probably my favorite by far was the chocolate covered licorice. Not a huge licorice fan in America. What we think of as like black Twizzlers licorice. It's just not really my thing. But I figured, hey, it's what everybody eats as like a sweet treat in Iceland. And I fell in love with it. I brought bags of it home. I could not eat enough of it while I was there. And you got to be careful because this stuff is the real deal licorice, which actually raises your blood pressure. Or can. And so you cannot eat bags of it. So, I had to separate it out and only eat a little bit every day, but it was so good. They have tons of flavors. Licorice is like the national food in Iceland. They have licorice flavored everything. Licorice is in everything, and I loved it. The big thing to eat when you're in Iceland that Jason enjoyed was the lamb. Iceland says that their lamb is the best in the world, and he said it's the best lamb he's ever had. I'm a vegetarian. I have no idea if the lamb was good, but he absolutely loved it. Also, they have something called, I should apologize right now to anybody who speaks Icelandic. Anytime I say these names, I'm going to slaughter them. I tried for the whole time we were in Iceland, and I never could get a single pronunciation right for any Icelandic word. But one of the things that they have is skyr, and it's kind of like a Greek yogurt-ish, but different. And I loved it. And I would just walk into a grocery store, grab a little container of skyr. They all generally come with a disposable spoon and, snack on a little container of yogurt skyr.
They serve that on Icelandair, and I think you can buy it at Starbucks. Isn't it the Siggy's or something like that? They have it at a lot of Starbucks where they have, it's a very thick yogurt.
Yeah, it's very thick, and it's got a little, I call it earthy or goaty taste, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just don't know how else to describe it. It's got a flavor that's a little more goat's milk, even though it's not. It just has that kind of tinge to it. But I loved it. So it comes in tons of flavors. My flavor was plain. I just ate plain or vanilla most of the time. But I tried a bunch of flavors because, of course, I was there, and that's what you do.
The licorice surprises me because I never heard that about a popular candy being like licorice flavored licorice. Obviously, Americans are all about like red vines and Twizzlers, and those aren't really even licorice, right? However, I had recently read a story about someone who died from eating too much black licorice. So I love that you offered the sound advice to our listeners. to pace yourself with black licorice because it is not safe to eat in large quantities.
It's true. What I did not pace myself very well with was the ice cream. Iceland is huge into ice cream. As a country, they love it. They serve it everywhere. Everybody's got a favorite ice cream place. And I ate so much ice cream while we were in Iceland. My goal was to try all the different favorite ice cream places in every town that we went to. And I ate so much ice cream in Iceland.
I'm sold. I'll be there tomorrow.
Oh my gosh, between being on the Magic and all the ice cream you can eat on board there, and then you do your shore excursions on one of those cruises to have even more ice cream, I couldn't imagine. Are you guys Anthony Bourdain fans by any chance? Did anybody watch Anthony Bourdain?
I'm a huge Anthony Bourdain fan, yeah.
And I do remember when he went to Iceland, I think the most challenging food for him to ever eat was in Iceland, and it was that fermented shark. And I can't remember what the name of it was. It made me think about that. We shouldn't leave food in Iceland on that note, because I know that they have some wonderful food there. Okay, you guys had an amazing itinerary, so many things to do. Let's kind of jump into it. So you land on Friday, and like you said, you guys don't just go to the hotel and sleep. What did you guys do?
Well, we decided to take the Inside the Volcano tour. I heard a ton of mixed reviews. Some people absolutely loved it. Some people were just like, we decided to give it a go. Spoiler, we ended up in the absolutely loved it. The idea of this adventure is it's the only one in the world you can do this in, but you get to actually go lower inside a inactive, dormant volcano and basically walk around inside the volcano for about 30 minutes. And it was amazing. I mean, the hike out is about a 2-mile hike. It's really easy. It's not at a fast pace. So we took a just great hike through the lava fields to get there. We go into the volcano. We got to explore. The colors are amazing. The colors look kind of like a geode. Honestly, if you've ever cracked open a geode and looked inside, it's purple and reds and blues and greens, and it's all the rocks. This is the natural colors inside. We got to walk around. They have a path, which is a rough path. You get to kind of explore and climb over the rocks and check everything out, take as many pictures as you want. And then you come out of the volcano after about 30 minutes and they serve you a nice hot meal of soup. I guess generally it's pretty rainy in this area and a little cold. We happened to land in Iceland in one of the hottest days of the year. And so hot soup would have been a miss, but it was really good. And they had a vegetarian option, which was amazing, was unexpected. And we really loved that adventure. It was a great way to start off our first day in Iceland and definitely kept us awake.
I mean, I want to go to a volcano as definitely a bucket list. I think a lot of folks think of volcanoes, they think about Hawaii because there's active volcanoes, but you make a really good point that a dormant volcano with all the colors and interesting geological structures and the fact that you probably won't burn and die on your journey is probably a really awesome bucket list type of thing to do as well.
Yeah, and don't worry, Iceland, depending on when you're there, does have active volcanoes. There happened to be one that was active while we were there. We didn't go and see it, but that was just a more of a scheduling issue than it was for anything else for us. Trying to get to a volcano that's active in Iceland isn't necessarily on the tour path that's super easy to do.
Right. Is Iceland growing in land shape and size, or are they so inland that there isn't really the Hawaiian thing of we've added 500 acres in the last 30 years or something like that?
So Iceland's super interesting. This is some stuff we learned while we were there. Iceland is actually on two of the tectonic plates. It's actually separating about 2 centimeters a year, if I remember my facts right. And so it's slowly growing bigger that way. And then there are places where the volcano has laid down lava and they're getting bigger and growing some beaches. It probably isn't growing, in my personal understanding, as fast as Hawaii, but it definitely is still growing, which is kind of cool.
Amazing. I would definitely be interested in going on this tour. It sounds right up my alley. Okay, so then that was all on your first day where you didn't sleep very much on the plane. So what was your second day like after you got some sleep?
We decided, the second day we knew that it would have been a long travel day. We didn't try to plan too much in. We slept in a little bit. We got up. We walked around the sports complex. That's where they do some of their Olympic training, just kind of outside. It was right by our hotel on the way to the Botanic Gardens. And we spent mid-morning to early afternoon walking around the Reykjavik Botanic Gardens, which was super cool. They've got a zoo in there. They've got a little bit of like a kiddie amusement park. Really small kid rides. And the gardens were great, and the gardens are free. And so that's always a bonus when you're traveling, if you can throw some free stuff in there, because Iceland is a little bit more on the expensive side. There's definitely ways to cut costs. Lots of people camp or use RVs, and tons of sites are free. But as an overall place to go, it's definitely not the cheapest place I've ever vacationed.
So one of the popular things for people to do is to go to the Blue Lagoon, which is kind of a geothermal pool that's nearby the airport, I believe, or outside of Reykjavik. Did you guys have any opportunities to do that? I didn't notice it later on. Did you guys do any geothermal stuff?
We did. We did a couple of different geothermal things. That second day we were in Iceland, we actually did a hike around a geothermal area, but it's not one you can get in. We did visit the Blue Lagoon. One of our other days, probably one of the top things we did was I got to go and we both sat in a natural geothermal pool out in the middle of nowhere, 4 hours drive roughly from Reykjavik, which was just absolutely one of my favorite moments in Iceland.
Were there other people there with you?
There were. It's a pretty popular spot, believe it or not, even though the drive out there is not easy. And we did it on a tour because regular cars, like just your standard rental car, can't even go there. The roads are not developed enough. So there were people, but most of the time I was in this geothermal river spring pool area, me and I don't know, half a dozen people most of the time. And I sat in there for the full time that I could allot on the tour, which was 2 hours. So I absolutely, it's just one of the highlights. You're sitting in this pool of water that's roughly between 105 and 135 degrees Fahrenheit, outside with lava around you and moss, and the water's flowing, and it's like being in a hot tub, but it's natural. And it was just sitting there in that moment was something that I'll never forget doing, and was worth every minute to me of the driving and the tour to sit there and enjoy it. Jason spent some time in there, and then he went with our guide and hiked around. I turned down the hike just to sit in the waters for a little bit longer.
Sounds amazing. Is it like hot, or just like nice temperature?
Depending on where you are. So the geothermal pools in Iceland, you definitely have to be careful. You cannot go in all of them. A vast majority of them are boiling. So you literally will get hurt if you go in them. But the ones that, people have kind of set aside and let, tourists know are okay to go in. It was comfortable. There was definitely places in the water that were warmer than others. If you got closer to the little mini waterfall, it was really warm. If you backed off from there, it was cool. So you could kind of find your temperature that was the most comfortable for you.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. The Blue Lagoon, for everybody out there, do some research on it. It's definitely the touristy spot to go to. So it's going to be a little bit different than your experience on that tour.
It was, but we went to the Blue Lagoon too, and we had a good time. Like, I know it's the tourist thing. Everybody goes, oh, it's really touristy. Yeah, so I'm a tourist. I had a good time. It was fun. We enjoyed it. I think we spent about 4 hours there.
Well, let's move into Sunday then. You guys decide to book a tour to visit the southern part of Iceland, which is known as the Golden Loop, I think.
So there's the Golden Circle, but that's not southern Iceland. Southern Iceland is a separate area. Okay,
so you guys decided to go on a 2-day tour with a group from southern Iceland. How did you pick the tour group that you booked with? And then can you talk about what you guys got to experience?
So Jason and I decided that we wanted to kind of see as much of Iceland as we could within our time frame and the things that interested us. And when I was doing the research, South Iceland looked like the place it had everything we wanted to see. And so I ended up booking a 2-day, so an overnight private tour with a company called Iceland Go Tours. And they were absolutely amazing. So we had a private car and a private driver / tour guide that took us all around different sites in South Iceland. And we were able to customize it to some extent. Since we don't know a ton about Iceland, I had some things that I had researched and said I wanted to see, and then let them fill in the rest. And they did an amazing job. I think if you ask us our favorite thing in Iceland, these 2 days are probably by far both of our favorite days that we spent in Iceland.
And that was just you and Jason and a tour guide?
Correct.
You said that you had a hotel that you stayed at that was different than your Hilton. So did you check out of the Hilton, or did you just keep the Hilton as a home base and still go and do this thing?
Sure. So the plan was originally to check out, but when I started doing research and pricing things out, it was actually cheaper overall for us to keep our Hilton for the entire time we were in Iceland and book separate hotel rooms for the couple of nights that we were outside of Reykjavik.
Okay, so tell me, compare the two hotels. What was your like 2-day remote hotel like?
So it was just one night overnight, and it's a really nice hotel. The room was really clean. It was very, I called it the Scandinavian look. It's very minimalist. It's pretty small rooms wise. Nothing compares. We've stayed in hotels in Japan, and once you've stayed in a hotel in Japan, nothing is small ever again. Honestly, that's the smallest hotel rooms I've ever been in. So this was fine. It was adequate. We literally got to the hotel late at night. We had dinner, we slept, and we left again first thing in the morning. So it didn't matter that much, but the hotel was great.
So give us some of the highlights of what you got to see on this 2-day tour through Southern Iceland, Lauren.
All right. Well, this is where I get to try to pronounce Icelandic names and do a horrible job at it. If some of them have some English second names, then I'll use those too. So we got to go to Seljalandsfoss, which is a waterfall that Disney fans will like because you get to walk behind it. And I felt like we totally missed the moment. Neither of us made the joke at the time that we got to see the backside of water. But it's a really cool waterfall. It's super awesome to walk behind it and walk fully around it. This was where in Iceland, I learned that a trail in Iceland is not the same as a trail in America, or I feel like anywhere else I've ever been. Iceland trails are rustic. That's the word I'm going to use, rustic. They're, areas that people have walked a whole bunch. And so it's made a trail, and it might go straight over some boulders or some rocks or around some stuff. There's never any railings. There's rarely any guidelines or like posts to make you not fall off the cliff. There's sometimes some ropes that say, hey, don't go here. But otherwise, you have to be prepared for a little more rustic walking. You could see the waterfall from the parking lot, just great if you're, have mobility issues. But to actually walk behind it, you had to kind of walk up a dirt path, over some rocks, behind some rocks, around some rocks, down some rocks. And that was where I learned really quickly that was probably what the rest of my trip in Iceland was going to look like.
From there, were you guys in a vehicle then that took you from spot to spot to spot? And I don't know if I'll have time to touch on every one of them, but what were some of your favorite highlights from the first day beyond the waterfall then?
Sure. So we were in an SUV, a really nice SUV with our driver. And so he would take us everywhere. And it's great. One of the things we love about Disney cruising is the fact that we don't have to do a whole lot of planning and a whole lot of the logistic stuff. And having this tour allowed us not to be the one dealing with the logistics of where to park the car, if there's any entrance fees, if there's any fees to be paid. We just showed up and he says, here, look at this site. Wow, it's amazing. Told us some history, and then we'd get back in the car and go to the next one. So that really kind of took the place of a Disney port adventure in our minds. That's kind of how we planned it, was, a 2-day long Disney port adventure. So the waterfall we went to was awesome. We loved, I don't even want to try to pronounce this one. This is probably my favorite spot in all of Iceland as a view. And I cannot pronounce it, but it's Fjarðarlander. That's wrong. But it's this valley that is, the views are just stunning. It's a waterfall through like river, and the valley kind of comes up with some steep cliffs, and you're standing at the top looking down, and it's a really great view. The smell of the moss and the water, and the day we were there, we got like these picture perfect clouds that kind of went over the top and made for like this gray sky. And I literally could have stood there forever. They had to drag me back to the car to go on to the next site to actually, finish our tour for the day. And we really liked that. And we went on a hike to Svartifoss, which is a waterfall it's pretty well known in Iceland as far as the things tourists talk about, where it's got a ton of basalt columns behind it. So it kind of looks like, I described it as an organ with water coming down, like a pipe organ. That was really cool. And that was like a 45-minute hike in and back out. And that day was just amazing. If I could have ended my trip in Iceland there, I probably would have been really happy. And then we got to go to the next day, which was possibly even better.
So that one you get to do, so going on to day 2, you do several different hikes, stop at a lot of different places. But you got to go out on a Zodiac boat too. What was that like? Yeah,
that Zodiac tour was one of the things that I said our guides sort of suggested. And once they suggested it back when we were planning the tour before we left, I said, oh, that's it. That's what we're doing. We were done. I know Chris is going to get super excited. Iceland has tons of glaciers. They're everywhere, literally everywhere. Glacier Lagoon was where we went for the Zodiac boat tour. And it's this lagoon of water that butts up to a glacier, and all the calving icebergs that fall off end up sitting in this lagoon and sort of floating their way through really slowly, and eventually dump off into actually Diamond Beach, which was also stunning. They go off into the ocean, and a lot of them come up on this beach. And so we combined those two and did that on day 2. And the Zodiac tour was absolutely amazing. So you're in a little Zodiac, which if people don't know, it's basically a really sturdy rubber boat. It kind of looks like what you see the Navy SEALs like getting on in movies to jump up onto, some big adventure. You climb in there with 10 or so of your new best friends, and you go out into this lagoon, and every day is different because they don't know what the weather's going to bring, where the ice is going to go, what's calved, but you go around and you see glaciers and you get really close. I mean, we were like, I don't know, 10 feet or less from most of the icebergs as we were zipping around. There were seals sleeping upside down. I've never seen a seal sleep upside down in an iceberg. They're just totally chilling because the orcas can't get in, so they know they're safe. We saw baby seals. We saw as much of the blue glacier ice as we could get our eyes to fill up with. It really was probably my most favorite memory from Iceland. And it's the one thing, if I was going to Iceland again, I'd be like, I have to do that.
That's a high recommendation. Also, it sounds amazing. I did develop an obsession with glaciers on my Alaskan cruise. I feel like what I had heard, and this is probably just like a popular retort because people like irony, but what I had heard is that Iceland is very green and Greenland is very icy. I don't actually know that that's true. And I'm sure both of those places have icy and green areas. But listening to you talk about there being a botanical garden and an unusually warm day and things like that definitely sets a different tone than I imagine. But I'm glad to hear that you can still have an icy glacial time in Iceland.
Yeah, absolutely. Iceland was really interesting in the fact that the views sort of changed pretty regularly in what you'd see. One area would be super like Mars looking with red lava rocks and plants that seemed like growing. And then you'd drive a couple hours and you'd be in this lush, mossy, foresty area. There's not a lot of trees in Iceland for a lot of different reasons. But there'd be some forest, and you'd go through a small little forest area, and then you'd turn the next corner and there'd be these like amazing cliffs with all the little puffin birds on them. And then another area would be a mountain with a glacier coming down from it with a ton of waterfalls. And Iceland was always a different view, and it always changed. And I wouldn't say every day was different. Every couple hours looked different from the last place you were if you were driving around.
It sounds like you got, by doing this like tour that takes you to sort of a different part of Iceland than Reykjavik, it sounds like you got to see the diversity of one place that you don't always get to see when you're cruising, right? Where a lot of times when you cruise, you may not go too far from a port because it takes time to travel there. So this 2-day excursion sounds absolutely amazing.
It was. Jason still talks about Diamond Beach, which the beaches in Iceland are generally, surprisingly, jet black sand. And Diamond Beach has this pure black sand. It's really soft and really kind of a strange texture if you're used to like Caribbean sand. All the glaciers wash up. So you're walking around in this jet black sand with these like blue and white glaciers, and they're just floating along and then wash up on the beach, and they stay there till they melt. And you just can't see something like that anywhere else. Like, I was not prepared for how awestruck I would be everywhere I looked in Iceland. And that was kind of the takeaway from those 2 days, which we did pretty early on in our trip, that I knew I was going to love Iceland way more than I had planned on based on everything we had seen. And, honestly, we just went to Iceland because we were going to go on the cruise, and the cruise was canceled. And we figured, well, why not? That was it. We never had any desire to go to Iceland. And now I've fallen in love head over heels.
We've been to the Black Sand Beach in Kona, and that black just makes the greens pop. The diversity or the contrast, I could imagine what the blues and just the colors look like being on those beaches in Iceland. Well, from that tour, which was done with Iceland Go Tours, we'll try and get the link in the show notes for that for people who want to possibly book with them. You go on to Tuesday, where you do the Golden Circle tour on your own. Now, this is a pretty popular tour that a lot of people can do and just kind of drive through. Can you talk about that real quick, Lauren?
Sure. We were actually supposed to do this with a tour group, and it got canceled a couple days ahead of time, which was disappointing. But we also knew this was something you can do pretty easy on your own if you have a rental car. It's basically, I don't remember how many kilometers it is, but it's a couple hours drive. I think it's like 3.5, 4 hours drive. It's totally doable. Lots of port adventures to it with just a day in Reykjavik. You drive around, and there's kind of some main sites that everybody sees, and you don't counterclockwise or clockwise. It really doesn't matter. We started out in Thingvellir, which is a national park. It's kind of got a lot of history. It's where they used to meet for their basically government meetings back in, I don't know, the 1100s. I have no idea. I don't remember the date at all. Honestly, probably should have read the sign better, but was more obsessed with looking at all the awesome views in Thingvellir. Kind of saw the history of their government and how their council used to work and some of that stuff. And then, of course, because I was in charge of planning our Golden Circle tour, we made a stop at a dairy farm and had some fresh made ice cream, which was amazing. Went to the next place that most people go on Golden Circle, which is Geyser. It's actually where the name geyser, the English word geyser, comes from. It was the name of a geothermal, for lack of a better word, geyser that shoots up in the air. And geyser is actually doesn't really erupt very often, but there's another one that's like 10 feet away that does like every 6 minutes. And so we got to see, an erupting geyser. That was really cool. And then went to yet another waterfall. If you don't like waterfalls, Iceland might not be for you because they're everywhere. And we went to Gullfoss waterfall, which was really stunning as well. And then finished it off with a late night hike around Cirid Crater, which is a volcanic crater that's really stunning in its color and is a nice little short hike.
You can do a late night hike because it doesn't get dark.
Yeah, we started our hike at 8 p.m. and I think we finished somewhere between 9 and 9:30. When we were there for the time, the sunset was somewhere between around 10:30 to 11 o'clock at night. And by set, I mean it kind of got dusky and kind of like dark-ish, not really ever dark. And it was, I think, usually back up somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, long before I was awake.
On our Alaskan cruise, we sailed out of, Steve always pronounces it different than me. So you tell me the name of it, Steve. That little port that has the oil spill museum. Seward. Okay. So when we were in Alaska, we flew into Anchorage and then had to take a train to Seward. And similarly, all the hotels have blackout curtains because it's just not dark. It's like midnight and you look outside and it's still kind of like bluish gray skies. I had not thought about the prospects of a night hike in that environment, but why not? I mean, if you're awake enough to hike, there's no light limitations. That sounds amazing.
If you're there earlier around summer solstice, it actually doesn't set at all. You get the 24 hours of daylight. And so I know there was people who were going on hikes pretty early in the morning to take pictures because none of the sites have any people. And most of the like natural tourist sites in Iceland are open 24 hours. And so realistically, you can go walk around a waterfall at 4 a.m. if you're so inclined. We are not.
Well, let's move on to your next day, Wednesday. You guys got an opportunity to go dry suit snorkeling. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So this was actually the thing I wanted. This was the thing that made me want to go to Iceland in the first place. When I looked at the Disney Cruise Line website and saw this was a port adventure, this is what made me pick the original Iceland cruise. You get to go in a dry suit and you get to snorkel in some of the clearest water in the world. Supposedly, it's freezing cold. It's just above freezing. So you get in this dry suit, you go in, you snorkel for about 30 minutes. You're snorkeling through the space in between the tectonic plates. It's super awesome. There's not a lot of fish, but it's really cool colors, super bright blues and some greens. And it was really amazing. You can either do it as a wetsuit or a dry suit. We both chose to do it as a dry suit, thinking we'd stay nice and warm and you can kind of just float along in the current and check it all out. I got the added bonus of finding out what the wetsuit experience would look like because my suit leaked. So it was pretty cold. In retrospect, if I had to choose, I would have chose the wetsuit. I think I got all of the bad parts about the dry suit, which is the lack of mobility and kind of you're sort of stuck in your suit, and none of the benefits of actually staying warm. I think having more mobility would have been my choice. And Jason said the same thing. He experienced the full dry suit and he says he wished he had chosen the wetsuit.
Well, I will tell you, as someone who has done this excursion in Alaska, that the wetsuit mobility is not my favorite, though I'm sure it is much better than the dry suit. The funniest thing on that excursion was when we got there, the guides were like, hey, so we just want to make sure that you know that it's going to be really claustrophobic and uncomfortable. And a lot of people panic once they get into the wetsuit. Are you okay with that? And we were like, what? And they were like, yeah, we just want to make sure you're okay with this. And we were like, what do you mean? Are we okay with that? And it literally was really claustrophobic.
Hey, this is going to be really dangerous and scary. Are you guys sure you really want to do this?
I was so confused. I was like, wait a minute. And also it's because of this podcast that I went on that, because one of our listeners was like, you have to do the cold water snorkeling. And I'm not saying that it wasn't cool. It was amazing. We snorkeled through thousands of jellyfish that don't sting you. That's amazing. But also, can we not like start an excursion by them being like, are you sure it's really claustrophobic? And you're like, wait a minute. But I do feel like your excursion, fish or not, is one of those things that you just want to be able to have in your memory bank of things that you have seen and experienced, because who can say that they've like snorkeled in freezing water between tectonic plates? Like, that's amazing.
It was really awesome. Makes you feel any better. We had to basically sign our lives away before we did this.
I'm sure. Oh, so did we. And also when I did it, my mask was leaking. So I ended up having to swim back to the boat and have them put a new mask on. Then I got to see what it was like to be completely alone trying to catch up to everybody. And I was like, this is really low key terrifying, but also cool, I guess, that I did this thing. So yeah, I would though give everybody the warning that it is not a comfortable experience. Dry suit snorkeling, wetsuit snorkeling in cold water is not about comfort. It is about the visual majesty of it all.
Well, let's move on to Thursday. Once again, you guys hit another kind of iconic Iceland tour where you guys go along the ring road. Can you talk a little bit about that, Lauren?
Sure. So our reason for taking the ring road was literally to get to Akureyri for what we were going to do on Friday. So we drove up the ring road in a rental car, kind of tried to decide to see some sights along the way. We saw a really cool turf museum, which is the old style houses in Iceland, which was really interesting. We went and saw the Christmas house in Akureyri once we got up to North Iceland. It's cute. It's a good, 20 or 30 minute diversion. I know a lot of Disneyport adventures go there. I would not go out of my way to go there. It was a fun 20 or 30 minutes, but it just was what it was. Of course, I had more ice cream in Akureyri, and then we got to the whole reason we wanted to go to North Iceland, which was, again, originally inspired by our Disney cruise that was going to be in Akureyri.
So you end up doing that on Friday. Can you talk about that?
So we got to go to a place called Grimsey Island. This is an island. It's about a 3-hour ferry ride off of Akureyri, which is the kind of more the north part of Iceland. Grimsey Island can either be reached by boat or plane. We chose to do boat based on a couple of factors: timing of when we were going to be in Akureyri, and the fact that the planes don't always go out and are really subject to weather. And this was somewhere that we absolutely wanted to go. And the ferries basically travel regardless of just about anything. They'll go in just about any weather. Grimsey Island is an island that has somewhere between 20 and 60 people who live on it full time. It's also where the Arctic Circle crosses Iceland. It's home to a ton of puffins. And it was just one of those places that we really wanted to go just for the fact that it was so interesting to us that it's a remote place that people live. As Jason described it, he goes, where else can you go to an island that has a restaurant, roads, and cars, and yet you can walk all the way across and end to end in a day if you wanted?
The ferry was not like you drove your rental car onto it and went there. It was like you were a passenger on a ferry going to an island and then you toured it on foot.
You had both options. You could take your car over. We chose just to walk on as passengers, and they have a nice indoor seating area. They have a kind of a mini cafe. They've got restrooms. They do prepare you to be seasick, is pretty common on this ferry. It can be a pretty rough ride. Jason described it as, he goes, you are cargo, and their goal is to get to the island to supply the island, and the passengers are, along for the ride. So they'll leave you if you're not ready for the ship. This is not a Disney Cruise Line port adventure. And if you're not there, you're going to be spending a lot of days on Grimsey Island on your way back, because they only come to the island every 2 or 3 days, depending on their schedule.
Okay, well, that's stressful. Mostly because I get so seasick. We haven't done a trip report of my Hawaii trip, but I got really seasick in the calmest seas ever. So the idea that it's like, this is known for people getting sick on this ferry is like, I wonder if I'll ever see where the Arctic Circle crosses Iceland. Maybe not.
I mean, there is the option to do the fly out. A lot of people do that. It's like a 30-minute flight. The downside is scheduling it. And it's also, once you're on the island, you're only there for 2 hours. And with the ferry, depending on when you go and their schedule, you're there closer to 5 hours. And we wanted as much time on the island as we could we had booked a tour to kind of walk around with a guide and see the island and cross the Arctic Circle, because you do have to walk a little bit from town. And, town is 30 or so houses on the island to actually cross the Arctic Circle, because I learned the Arctic Circle moves every year and eventually it won't even cross this part of the island, and then it won't cross Iceland at all. And so we were super excited to cross the Arctic Circle, just to say we've done it, honestly. But we were mostly excited to kind of just experience a place that's so remote and so small and, self-sufficient. And that's just not something you can do in a lot of places.
So our airline used to give, if you flew across the Arctic Circle, not necessarily for people who live up north of the Arctic Circle, but if you went up there for some kind of business or just wanted to do it, kind of as a tourist, they used to give out like little certificates that said you crossed the Arctic Circle, which I always thought was kind of cool. So Saturday, I mean, it looks amazing. It's a ways out there. I'm looking at it on the map, how far away that is. So Saturday, you guys spend the day in Akureyri. What was that like versus Reykjavik? It's a little bit smaller, I do believe. And what did you guys do?
It's a lot smaller. You could see the whole town in a day. And I don't want to say that as it wasn't a charming, great place, but there just isn't a ton of what most people think of as tourist things to do in Akureyri. It was super cute. It had a nice little shopping area. One of the things I found out being in Iceland that I wasn't fully prepared for is shops in Iceland, like tourist shops, clothing shops, that sort of thing, even like home goods type of stores, are only open for a pretty limited amount of hours every day, somewhere between 11 o'clock and 6 p.m. And so if you're out touring, that's kind of like prime touring time when you're in Iceland. We had a really hard time actually getting into like tourist stores because they were closed often. And that was what happened for Akureyri. We were out again before the stores were open, and we came in the night before once they were closed from our trip back from Grimsey Island. And so we saw them, but we didn't get to go in any of them. We walked around and saw the big church that's really popular in Akureyri. Again, we saw some botanical gardens. And then we drove out a little bit further on the ring road to see Godafoss, another huge waterfall, which was stunning. We had packed a picnic lunch, enjoyed our lunch there, and then basically drove back to Reykjavik on the ring road with a little stop at a volcanic crater for a hike, just to kind of get out of the car and stretch about 2/3 of the way through.
What about Sunday? I hear on Sunday you did some type of super Jeep tour?
Yeah, Sunday, again, I was looking for places. I wanted to see as much of Iceland as I could and all the different parts of Iceland. And we wanted to go out to Landmannalaugar, which is an area that's really remote. This is where I sat in the geothermal river and just sat for my 2 hours in the water. It's got a ton of cool views. We get to see, some volcanoes, which I didn't realize when I was planning Iceland. I'm like, I want to see some volcanoes. They're like everywhere. They're everywhere. It wasn't, you just have to know which one of the mountains is a volcano and which one isn't. And somebody has to point it out to you. And so, but we got to go drive past some volcanoes, see a bunch of waterfalls, see some cool crater lakes. It's just a super remote area with kind of unnatural views. I mean, some of like the really cool scenes in movies, like Thor has some scenes that are filmed in Iceland. And this is the kind of stuff you're looking at going, yeah, no, I can totally see this. This looks like Thor. And so we had a great time with our guide. The Super Jeep is these super cool Jeeps that they like pump air into the tires. It's like special air. I don't remember what was special about it. I don't know, it was nitrogen filled or whatever. I have no idea. But it basically makes you, you're driving on back roads for 60 kilometers of this tour. And it makes it super smooth. Like I was a little concerned if I was going to get like shooken about, and it was a super smooth ride. We had a great tour. We, again, had a private guide and a car. It was great. Like we really enjoyed our day. This was kind of, towards the end of the trip, and we had seen a lot of Iceland, and even still we were super impressed by what we saw in this part of Iceland.
So I'd be remiss to not ask you about the famous hot dog dinner you had that night.
Yeah. So of course you're in Iceland. Jason had to try the famous hot dog. If you haven't heard the story, I cannot pronounce the name of this shop. I'm not even going to try, but if you literally Google famous hot dog in Iceland, it's going to come up. But it's the place that Bill Clinton ate a hot dog back in the day that made it super famous because they took a picture of him eating it at this tiny little hot dog stand. And now everybody goes to eat a hot dog in Iceland at this stand. hint from what everybody told me, the hot dogs are kind of just hot dogs, but you got to do it. And so we went and he picked up one of these hot dogs at the famous hot dog stand, said it was really good.
All right. I've never heard of famous hot dog from Iceland, and now I want one.
But then you're on to ice cream as well. So it sounds like the ice cream was amazing. Moving on into Monday, it seems like you guys had maybe a little bit more of a down day. You've been seeing so much of Iceland, traveling to Grimsey Island, up to Akureyri, and throughout the kind of countryside. It looks like you guys had kind of a down day in town.
Yeah, we did. We had, a breakfast. We walked around the big church in Iceland, which everybody kind of knows it's basically the tallest structure in Reykjavik. You can see it from everywhere. You can see it from, out even in the ocean. It's kind of like the marker that everybody uses in Reykjavik, and you can go in it. You can go up in the elevator. It's free to walk around in the church, and then you pay a fee to kind of go up in the elevator into the bell tower and look around. We chose not to do that part of it because we had already gone to another place during our trip that we got a really good view of Reykjavik. And then we went and sat in the Blue Lagoon for like 4 hours and just chilled out because the next day we were leaving Iceland. We were really sad.
Well, I mean, I guess it's nice to reflect on your trip in a thermal Blue Lagoon.
No, there's no better place to spend a couple of hours in Iceland before you're ready to leave the next day.
Well, since going home is always the most boring part, we'll be quick on this. What was the final things you did in Iceland before you headed home?
We had breakfast at a nice little coffee place, and then we walked around a path that kind of follows the ocean around Reykjavik. And then we went to the airport and dealt with all the problems that are at the airport. I would definitely say, everything changes, everything's different, but get to the airport when you're leaving Reykjavik early. Just like we were talking about at the beginning, they schedule all the flights to leave at the same time, which means every flight going to the US is leaving within the same hour-ish window. So you can imagine every flight is checking in at the same time, getting through security at the same time, checking their luggage at the same time. And just give yourself a ton of time, which we did. We hung out at the airport. Frankly, we didn't have a whole lot of time by the time we went through the whole process, and then had a nice 8-hour flight back to Seattle.
So I want to touch on Seattle because you went to two places that I absolutely love while you're in Seattle because you spend some time there. Did you stay up by the market?
We actually stayed pretty close to the place we went for breakfast.
Okay.
The Starbucks Reserve Roastery. We have a hotel. We like Seattle. We go to Seattle when we can. We have a hotel we like in Seattle. And we stayed there and went to the Starbucks Reserve Roastery for breakfast, which is basically a must hit anytime we're in Seattle.
Yeah,
they have a surprising amount of good food at the roastery. If you're thinking it's a normal Starbucks, it's not. They actually roast beans there, yes, but also they have really interesting things that they make in-house food-wise. And don't worry, you don't have to go all the way to Seattle for one of these. There is also a marquee Starbucks roastery in New York City if you find yourself there near Chelsea Market. And they have the exact same sort of food menus, and they roast beans there as well.
Yep, there's also one in downtown Chicago.
Where are we with Los Angeles? We don't have anything like that here.
Well, you also went to Beecher's cheese shop as well, which I absolutely love their award-winning cheese that we
flagship.
Serve. Yeah, their flagship cheese. So can you talk about that a little bit?
So Jason has to stop at the Reserve Roastery when we're in Seattle. I have to stop at Beecher's cream or cheese shop, and I go in for one thing and one thing only. I want the cheese curds. I love them. I get a little tub of cheese curds and a fork. And there's a picture of me standing outside of the cheese shop, eating with my fork out of the tub. I don't even wait. I love these things so much. And so we're in Seattle for a couple hours and we're picking up Starbucks and cheese. But seriously, it's what we do.
It's amazing. Those are really good cheese curds. Also, they have something called the world's best mac and cheese. And it's up there. I'm a mac and cheese connoisseur. And I would say it is probably one of the top 5 I've ever had. And you can get that in the shop there as well.
I knew you were a churro connoisseur, but not a mac and cheese connoisseur.
Oh, I am a mac and cheese connoisseur. That's why every time Christy's like, Blake got the Kraft mac and cheese from so-and-so, I'm like, that is not acceptable. I don't want to hear about it. That's gross. But another fun fact is there is a flagship Beecher's store in New York City as well. So you could go to New York City and go to both of your favorite places if you wanted to. But it's nice to know that they're right next door to each other in, what is that? It's right near Pike's Place.
Yeah, it is. It's basically it's in the Pike's Place Market. It's not in the main market building, but it's literally across
the street. Yeah.
No, when we go to New York, we've already got a full plate of coffee, the cheese, and then we pick up pizza and bagels.
Well, I'm glad to know that we all have similar taste in must-do food and coffee options in major cities. That's a kindred spirit.
If you've never tried Beecher's cheese and you're going through Seattle to possibly cruise to Alaska, they do have a Beecher's shop there in the airport as well, where you can pick up those cheese curds, which I have been known to do at times. And I think I cut you off, Lauren. Did I cut you off? Were you saying something you wanted to say? I apologize.
Oh, no, I was just, this was the first time we've ever come back from a vacation and tacked on, it wasn't a full day, a couple of hours in another city. And it was actually a really nice transition from being on vacation to kind of being sort of back home. And it was something I've never done before. And I would highly recommend it. It made the transition to going back to the real world a little less shocking. We didn't have to get off a flight, at 10 p.m. at night and then go back to work the next day. Having that just couple hours in Seattle before we flew back home was a kind of a great thing that we've never done before. And I would recommend if you can work it into your schedule. For us, it had mostly to do with flights. That was the reason we did it, but it worked out really well for pacing the vacation.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good tip. Believe it or not, I have never left a Disney cruise and flown out of that city immediately. I always spend one day after I get off the cruise doing something local, so that it doesn't feel like the sting of debarkation and then you have to run to the airport and fly back to LA. Your trip sounds amazing. I want to go. I already want to look into all of these things, whether I do it on a cruise or do it on my own. I definitely want to add this to my rotation of future vacation options. Do you have any sort of final thoughts or overview for our listeners around this particular itinerary? Whether you would have done it as a cruise, or do you think the cruise would have been as amazing as it sounds like this trip was?
There's a lot of places that I've gone on a cruise that I got to experience for a day. And if I could go to Iceland, or I didn't think what I've talked about today sounds interesting, go to Iceland anyway, do the day or two, you'll get a great overview and enjoy it. If what I talked about today sounds super amazing and super cool, know that you cannot do what we did doing it with a Disney cruise. And so that's kind of how I would decide which route to go. If I had only done this on the cruise, I probably would have said I had a great time and it would have been an amazing cruise and I would have seen other stuff. But knowing what I know post, I'm really glad we did it as a land-based vacation. We got to see so many more things and so much more of the country than I ever could have done in a 2 or 3 days stopover in Iceland on a Disney cruise.
Yeah, and Disney Disney, just so everybody knows, does have an Adventures by Disney that does some of the stuff you got to do, but not all of it. As we talk about a lot, Adventures by Disney is a premium travel option. It's very expensive and not too easy on the wallet. And it's possible that you probably got to do more for the same amount or less just by planning it yourself or choosing these specialized tours as opposed to having the entire thing be a tour. So a lot of great tips here, a lot of options if you just want to go on a cruise and get a little taste of Iceland, or if you want to do an Adventures by Disney and have it fully curated by the mouse, or if you want to listen to this podcast and just sort of pick and choose the things that sound amazing to you. There are lots of options for visiting this part of the world, and I'm so glad we got to talk about them today.
Definitely, and well said. And I think we'll probably just leave it at that, Chris, because you kind of wrapped it up so well. So, Lauren, thank you so much for offering to come on. I know a lot of our listeners love cruising, but just love travel in general. And this is kind of a place that a lot of people don't know a lot about. But as you said, you fell in love with it, and it is an amazing place to visit. Thanks for all your tips and everything else. I'm going to put you on the spot, and I know you're going to tell me no, but what have you guys got planned next?
Hey, well, you already know the answer, right? We never tell anybody where we're going next. We do have some pretty awesome stuff planned coming up, and I'll be sure to let you know when we're back and we can talk about where we went next. But I bet you can guess, Steve, they're not going to be any 3 or 4 day adventures.
Definitely not 3 or 4 days. But let's just hope that it's not as long between your last vacation and your next one. And we hope to have you back sooner than later, Lauren.
Great. I always love coming and talking with you guys. It's one of my favorite things to do post-trip is relive the trip with you guys on the podcast and all the listeners.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Lauren. All the best to you and Jason. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Best as we go into the fall. And we look forward to talking to you after your next trip.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Lauren for coming on and sharing her and Jason's experience as they turned their cruise, which was canceled in 2021, into a land vacation to Iceland. And we look forward to bringing her back on next time they get back from their next adventure. Always interesting to find out, and I love the fact that she keeps it a secret from us. And we don't know until the last minute either as far as where their adventures are going to take them. Well, if you're interested in sailing to Iceland with Disney Cruise Line, they are back in the books in 2022. There's an August 17th to the 28th sailing. It's an 11-night sailing, which features 2 nights in Reykjavik. If you're enjoying our podcast and know others who would enjoy it as well, we sure would appreciate it if you pass it along. It helps us get us a little bit better known in the Disney cruising, Disney, and just the cruising community in general. And if you have time to stop by iTunes and leave us a review, that also helps us get the word out so more people can find our show. We'd also like to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters who help bring the show to you each and every week. You can go over to patreon.com/DCL podcast where you can find out all the information there where you can help support the show and also get some additional content as well. We've got a lot more trip reports coming to you with the Disney Wonder starting to set sail down out of San Diego, the Disney Fantasy, and also the Disney Dream out of Port Canaveral. The Disney Magic is making her way across from England and headed towards Miami, where she'll begin sailing later in October. So watch for trip reports from all those ships as we continue on into this Halloween season in October. Well, between now and our next show, if you and your family are heading out on a cruise, a Walt Disney World vacation, or just enjoying time together wherever you may live, on behalf of myself, Steve, Christy, and Chris, all of us here at the DCL Podcast, we'd like to wish you be well, take care of each other, enjoy the time you have with each other, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.
The DCL Podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.